By dawn, the most feared man in the city would be bleeding for someone he wasn't supposed to care about. But right now, it was past midnight, and his office was the quietest place in the entire building. The tower he owned sat above Seoul like a cold crown, glass, steel and silence. Even the city noise couldn't climb this high down below. Traffic whispered that up here, only power spoke. Kang Junhyuk didn't rush when he stepped out of the private elevator. He never rushed, people rushed when they were afraid, and fear was something he collected from others, not something he carried himself. His suit jacket was still perfect, his cuffs still sharp, his face unreadable. The kind of face that made men straighten their backs and women lower their eyes without knowing why. His guards stayed outside the corridor, as always, not because he needed them near him. Because no one dared to be near him unless invited. Junhyuk walked the last stretch alone, keycard in hand, expecting nothing but paperwork and the stale smell of wood polish. Then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong in his world, not a scream, not a sob, a muffled inhale, like someone was swallowing their pain because they couldn't afford to let it spill. He stopped for 2 seconds. The most dangerous man in the city stood still, listening like a stranger outside his own door. The noise came again, softer this time, trembling breath, choked silence right after. His gaze lowered to the small strip of warm light bleeding under the office door. That light should have been offed. He didn't hesitate. He opened the door. The smell hit him first, perfume and disinfectant, floor cleaner, cold air from outside. And something metallic, sharp enough to cut through all of it. Blood. His eyes moved across the room fast, without panic. Panic was for men who lacked control. His office was untouched. Desk neat, leather chairs perfect, a bottle of untouched whiskey on the bar cart. The city lights behind the window shimmering like they didn't know sin existed. Then he saw her. On the floor, beside the cabinet where he kept private files, sat a woman in a black housekeeping uniform. Knees pulled close to her chest, head bowed, shoulders shaking like she'd been trying to stay silent for too long, and finally failed. Her skin was deep brown against the pale marble, as if the room itself was trying to reject her presence. The maid, his maid. She looked up fast, like she felt the weight of him before she saw him. Her eyes were wide, glassy, terrified. Not of being caught in his office, but of being caught at all. She wiped her face immediately, hard, like she could erase the evidence of weakness, like tears were a mistake she couldn't afford. Her fingers trembled as she forced herself to inhale. "Sir." Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. I am sorry, I was just cleaning." Junhyuk didn't answer. He stepped closer, slow, quiet, his footsteps barely making sound on the marble. A predator didn't need noise to be heard. His presence was enough. She forced herself to stand. And that's when he noticed how unnatural the movement was. Her left arm stayed stiff, her shoulder dipped slightly, protecting something. Her body turned just a fraction to hide herself, the way someone hides bruises before anyone asks. She tried to smile. It was a terrible lie. "You're in my office," he said at last, his voice low and calm, not curious, not angry. Just stating a fact like it was already part of a sentence he'd finished in his mind. "I know," she whispered. "I'm sorry that I didn't mean to." Her words died when his eyes dropped to her sleeve, a dark stain smeared near her wrist. Not cleaning solution, not coffee, not ink, blood, and not the light kind from a paper cut either. It was too thick, too fresh, too real. Her hand twitched as if she wanted to hide it, and then she froze, realizing he'd already seen it. Junhyuk's gaze sharpened, the air in the room shifted. The temperature didn't change, but the mood did, like a blade had been pulled from its sheath without anyone making a sound. "That isn't from cleaning," he said. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. Her eyes flicked to the door. Not because she wanted to escape him, because she was afraid of someone else walking in. That tiny glance told him more than any confession could. Junhyuk walked to the door without turning his back on her. He closed it slowly, locked it, click. The sound was small, but the meaning was not. Her breath caught in her throat, her whole body tightened like the room had become a cage. He turned back to her, for the first time. His face wasn't just cold, it was controlled anger, the kind that didn't explode, the kind that punished. He stopped only an arm's length away, his shadow falling over her like a warning. "Look at me," he said softly. She tried, she failed. Her eyes watered again, furious at herself for it. Junhyuk's voice dropped even lower, so calm it felt unreal. "Tell me who touched you." She didn't answer him right away. Not because she didn't understand, Because she understood too well, her throat worked like she was trying to swallow a scream, and when she finally spoke, the words came out thin, practiced, like a lie she'd repeated until it stopped sounding like one. "It's nothing," she said. But her voice broke on the second syllable, and Junhyuk heard it. That crack wasn't pain. It was fear. The kind of fear that comes from knowing the punishment doesn't end when the bruises fade. His eyes stayed on her face. Not in hunger. Not in pity. In calculation. People lied to him every day. Men, women, politicians, rivals. He always knew, but this was different. This lie wasn't trying to protect her reputation, it was trying to protect her life. She forced a small smile again. It looked like it hurt. "I'm fine, sir. I just slipped." Junhyuk didn't move. The room stayed silent, but the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was crowded with everything she wasn't saying. He lowered his gaze to her wrist. Then to her elbow. Then the curve of her upper arm where the fabric pulled too tight, like something underneath was swelling. "Raise your sleeve," he said. Her eyes snapped up, panic flashing so fast she couldn't hide it. No, it came out sharper than she meant. She immediately softened it, like she'd remembered who was standing in front of her. "I mean, it's okay. It's nothing. I can handle it." Junhyuk's voice didn't rise, it dropped. "You're bleeding in my office." She stared down at the stain like she'd forgotten it was there. Like she'd been trying so hard to act normal, she almost believed it. Then her fingers slid over the fabric, pressing gently. She flinched anyway. Junhyuk's jaw tightened, barely noticeable. But in his world, tiny movements were declarations of war. "You didn't have that bruise this morning," he said. Her body went still. He remembered. Not her name. He never cared about names that didn't matter. But he remembered details: who walked past him. Who lowered their eyes. Who held themselves like they were used to pain. This morning she'd been quiet, respectful, invisible like she always tried to be. She had passed him near the hallway with a tray of fresh towels, head bowed, hair wrapped neatly back, moving like she was trying not to take up space, and her skin had been clean, no purple marks, no swelling, no fear shaking behind her smile. Now her cheek looked slightly puffy, like someone had slapped her hard enough to leave a memory. Her lips parted as if she wanted to deny it again, but the lie wouldn't come out smoothly this time. "I don't know what you mean," she whispered. Junhyuk stepped closer, slowly, deliberately, so she could feel the distance vanish before she could decide to run. His calm shifted. It didn't turn into shouting, it turned into something colder. Something worse than rage. Rage was loud. Coldness was final. He reached out, not to touch her, just close enough that she could feel the heat of his hand near her sleeve. She jerked back. That reaction told him everything, not just that she'd been hurt, but that she'd been trained to expect pain from hands. Her eyes shone with frustrated tears, and she blinked them away violently, like crying was another crime. "Please," she said, voice trembling. "Just leave it." There it was, not "I'm okay," not "I'm fine." Just leave it, like she wasn't asking for mercy, she was warning him. Junhyuk stared at her for a long moment. "You're protecting someone," he said quietly. Her breathing stopped. He watched her throat move again. Her eyes flicked away, then back. Her shoulders lifted, like she was bracing for impact that didn't come. "You don't know anything," she whispered. "But you do," he replied. "And that's why you're afraid." The words hit her like a slap. She looked down, shaking her head once, slowly, as if denial could erase the past few hours. "I can't," she said, barely audible. "If I say it, it gets worse." Junhyuk's eyes narrowed. "So it's already been worse," he said. She didn't answer, because she couldn't. Junhyuk pulled his phone from his pocket. The screen lit his face for half a second, sharp angles and unreadable eyes. He was about to call someone who would make problems disappear, someone who wouldn't ask questions. Then the phone vibrated in his palm, a new message, unknown number. He looked down. One line. "Leave it alone. She's not yours." The room changed again. Even the city lights outside seemed dimmer. Her eyes widened when she saw his face shift, not in fear, not even surprise, but in something far more dangerous: recognition. Because that message wasn't meant to warn him, it was meant to put him in his place. Junhyuk read it once. Then again. Slowly, like he wanted to taste the disrespect, his jaw tightened so hard the muscle jumped once, and in that moment, she realized the worst mistake wasn't what happened to her. The worst mistake was that someone had now dragged him into it. Junhyuk lifted his eyes from the phone to her face. His voice was quiet, deadly calm. "Someone thinks they can challenge me," he said. He didn't ask it like a question, he said it like a sentence already ending in blood. Amara didn't sleep in the staff quarters that night. Not because she didn't want to. Because the moment she closed her eyes, the memories came back sharp, like glass under her eyelids. Her name was Amara. But in this house nobody used it. To them she was just the maid. Pair of quiet hands. A shadow that cleaned, served, disappeared. And that was exactly how she survived. Amara had learned early that in Korea, being a black foreign worker meant people decided who you were before you even opened your mouth. Some stared too long. Some refused to look at her at all. Most treated her like a temporary thing, something to ignore until it moved out of the way. She didn't fight it. She leaned into it. Because being unseen was safer than being remembered. When she first arrived, she told herself she would work, save money, and leave. No friends. No attachments. No mistakes. But survival had a way of turning into a cage without anyone noticing. She remembered the airport lights. The cold metal railings. The way her suitcase wheels rattled like they were nervous too. She'd come with one suitcase, one phone, and a fake smile so practiced it almost looked real. She didn't come to chase love. She didn't come to chase dreams. She came because staying where she was meant dying slowly. Her mother's last voice message still lived in her phone. "Don't trust anyone too quickly," she had said. "People will smile at you and still let you fall." Amara listened to that message once a month like a ritual. Like prayer. First she worked in restaurants. Washing dishes until her hands cracked. Taking double shifts while her back screamed. Smiling through insults she couldn't afford to correct. Then someone offered her this job. Mansion. Good pay. No outside contact. Strict rules. The kind of place people whispered about. The kind of place you didn't apply to. You were chosen for. She remembered the day she saw him for the first time. Junhyuk. Not on a screen. Not in a headline. In real life. Walking past her like the hallway belonged to his breathing. Everyone froze when he passed. The guards straightened. The staff lowered their eyes like they were afraid eye contact counted as disrespect. And for a second, Amara had almost done the same. Almost. But then she heard his name spoken under someone's breath, like a warning. And her stomach had dropped. Not because she feared him. Because she recognized the sound of power. She had seen power before. Not this kind. But enough to know it always asked for a price. So from day one, Amara did what she always did best. She became small. Tough-voiced. Perfectly forgettable. She avoided cameras not because she was paranoid. But because she'd learned cameras were just eyes that never blinked. In the staff hallway she always took the corner route, the blind spots. In the kitchen, she kept her head down when the security feeds played on the wall screens. And when she had to pass a camera, she made sure her face was hidden, turned slightly away, a tray held just high enough, hair falling forward. The other maids thought she was shy. The guards thought she was respectful. Only Amara knew the truth. She wasn't hiding from the house. She was hiding from the world outside it. Because before she became the maid, she had been someone else. Someone with a life that didn't fit inside a uniform and white gloves. Even now when she heard his name, Junhyuk, it did something to her body. A flinch she hated. A coldness that slipped into her bones without permission. Not because of him. Because of who followed people like him. Men who didn't knock. Men who didn't warn. Men who smiled while they ruined you. Her hands trembled as she stood alone in the storage room. Breath coming shallow, fingers clutching a cloth like it could hold her together. She kept repeating one sentence in her mind. Don't say anything. Don't say any name. But her mind was tired. Her body was bleeding. Her fear was louder than her discipline. And in the quiet, her mouth betrayed her. It wasn't supposed to happen again, she whispered. The words barely existed. Just there. But they carried something inside them. Name. Min Jae. The moment the name left her lips, the room went dead. Amara didn't even realize she'd spoken it until she felt the temperature change. Like winter had entered the mansion. She lifted her eyes. And Junhyuk was staring at her. Not confused. Not questioning. Knowing. His face didn't twist with anger. It tightened into something worse. Something personal. He took one slow step closer, gaze locked on hers, voice dropping so low it sounded like a knife sliding free. Say that name again. Amara's heart slammed against her ribs. No, she whispered. I didn't. But he cut her off, calm and final. That man, Junhyuk said, eyes darkening, is under my protection. Junhyuk didn't move for a full second after saying it. Not because he hesitated. Because his mind was already ahead of the room, already calculating outcomes, already choosing which sins would be paid for tonight. Amara felt it before she understood it, something shifting behind his calm. Like the air itself had learned fear. She had seen men get angry. She had seen men shout, slam things, threaten. But Junhyuk didn't do any of that. He just stared at her the way a storm stares at the ocean before it swallows it whole. Under your protection, Amara repeated, voice thin. Then why would he? Her words died as soon as they formed. Because even saying why felt like stepping into a room she didn't have permission to enter. Junhyuk's expression didn't crack, but his jaw tightened once, sharp enough to signal something breaking inside him. His eyes flicked to the blood on her sleeve again. Not cleaning blood. Fresh. Wrong. Message. He reached out and caught her wrist. Not rough, not gentle. Controlled. Like he was checking a weapon. He turned her arm slightly, enough to see the smear more clearly. His thumb hovered near the stain. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. He already knew. Amara flinched and tried to pull back. Instinct. Shame. Fear. He didn't let go. His voice was low. Who else knows you were in here? No one, she whispered. I didn't mean to. Who else? He repeated slower. Amara swallowed hard. Nobody. That answer satisfied him. Not because it was comforting, but because it made the next step easier. He released her wrist like she was fragile glass and turned his head slightly toward the door. His eyes didn't leave her, but his attention did. A shift in focus that felt like a gun being aimed elsewhere. Sit, he said. It wasn't a request. Amara's knees almost gave out with relief because sitting meant she wasn't being thrown out. Sitting meant she could breathe. She lowered herself onto the edge of the leather couch beside his desk, careful not to stain it, careful not to exist too loudly. Junhyuk moved behind his desk with the quiet patience of a man who had never once in his life rushed. His hand slid into the inside pocket of his coat and came out with a phone. It wasn't the phone people used for casual calls. It was the kind of phone that didn't ring unless someone might die. He didn't look at the screen. He didn't need to. He tapped a number from memory. And when the call connected, he spoke like he was ordering tea. It's me. Was. A man's voice murmured something on the other end. Junhyuk's gaze sharpened. Close the east gate. Another pause. Now. Amara watched him, heart hammering, trying to understand what kind of world moved this fast without noise. This wasn't panic. This was procedure. Like he'd done it before. Like he'd been waiting for the excuse. He ended the call and dialed again immediately. Bring Juno and Seekjin. And don't come through the front corridor. His voice stayed soft. Calm enough to fool anyone listening from outside. But Amara could hear something underneath it. Not rage. Not cruelty. Certainty. He hung up again, then placed the phone down like it weighed nothing. The mansion didn't change in a dramatic way. There was no alarm, no shouting down the hall, no running footsteps. But Amara felt it anyway, something tightening. A quiet lockdown spreading through the building like cold water. Somewhere doors were being secured. Cameras were being watched by new eyes. Guards were shifting positions without being told twice. It was so silent it felt unreal. Like the entire estate was holding its breath so nothing would disturb his decision. Amara's throat burned. If he's under your protection, why would you protect someone like that? she asked before she could stop herself. The question came out soft, almost broken. Junhyuk didn't answer immediately. He leaned back in his chair, staring at her like her words had confirmed something he'd been pretending not to see. When he finally spoke, his voice was still calm, still controlled, but colder. Because he belongs to me. Amara's skin crawled. Not from possessiveness. From the implication. Belongs to me. Like human beings were property. Like monsters didn't hide behind masks in this house. They lived openly and called it loyalty. And you? She asked without meaning to. Do I belong to you too? For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Not softness, not warmth, something darker, something that looked almost like regret. He stood up, slow and deliberate, and walked around the desk until he was close enough that Amara could smell his cologne. Clean, expensive, sharp. He crouched slightly so he was at eye level with her, forcing her to see him as a man and not a rumor. No, he said quietly. You're the problem. Amara's breath caught. What? He looked at her sleeve again, at the blood, at the tremor she couldn't control. And his voice dropped even lower. You shouldn't have been touched. The words didn't sound protective. They sounded like a sentence being passed. He straightened and turned toward the office window, staring out into the frozen night beyond the glass. Seoul looked distant from here. Quiet. Like nothing terrible could happen in a city full of lights. But Amara knew better. The most dangerous things happened in silence. Junhyuk lifted his phone one last time and typed something with 2 thumbs. Then he spoke without turning around, voice so soft it barely felt real. Before sunrise, he said, I'll know everything. Junhyuk didn't raise his voice when he moved. He didn't need to. The door opened without a knock, because knocking was for normal houses. Juno stepped in first, broad shoulders filling the frame, eyes scanning the office like a weapon was already aimed. Seekjin followed, quieter, sharper, the kind of man who noticed what other men tried to hide. Neither of them asked questions. Their eyes went to Amara, then to the blood on her sleeve, then back to their boss. Junhyuk said only one sentence. Take her to the inner room. Amara's breath caught. The inner room sounded like a place people didn't come back from. Her fingers curled into the fabric of her skirt so tight her knuckles ached. I can go back to my quarters, she tried, because that was what she always did. Make herself small, make herself easy, make herself invisible. Junhyuk looked at her once. Just once. And in that glance, she understood the worst part. She wasn't being moved for comfort. She was being moved because this building had decided she mattered now. Juno approached and offered his hand like it was polite, like she was a guest. But his eyes were hard, and when she stood, her legs shook beneath her. They didn't lead her through the main halls. They took the narrow corridor that ran behind the walls. Service paths built for staff, built for secrets. The lights were dimmer there. The air colder. The silence heavier. Amara could hear her own heartbeat like footsteps. They stopped at a door with no handle on the outside. Juno pressed his thumb to a hidden scanner. Soft click. The door opened. Inside was a safe room disguised as a storage space. Steel walls behind wood panels, cameras in the corners like black eyes. A couch that looked too clean to belong to this kind of place. No windows. No escape routes. Just safety that felt like a cage. Seekjin stepped in behind her and closed the door. The lock sounded final. Amara turned, panic rising sharp. Please, she whispered. I didn't do anything. I swear. Juno's gaze softened by a fraction. If you did something, you wouldn't be standing. That was supposed to be reassurance. It wasn't. She sat slowly, hands folded in her lap like a child waiting for punishment. Her mind raced through every moment of the day. Every person she'd passed. Every door she'd opened. Every corner she'd turned. Because she knew this mansion. And she knew something else too. When Junhyuk started moving like this. Somebody always paid. Minutes passed. Or hours. She couldn't tell. Time didn't work properly in a room with no light outside. Through the walls she heard movement. Not loud. Not chaotic, just coordinated. A door shutting somewhere far away. Footsteps in a tight rhythm. Muffled voice. Then nothing again. It was worse than screaming. Because silence meant control. And control meant the violence had already happened somewhere else. Amara pressed her forehead into her palms, trying to breathe without making noise. But her guilt kept crawling up her throat like smoke. Didn't even make sense. She was the one bleeding. She was the one hurt. So why did she feel like the criminal? Because she knew what people did when they panicked. They pointed fingers. They lied. They gave up the weakest person in the room just to survive. She heard the door outside unlock. Her head snapped up so fast her neck strained. Juno stepped in first, his expression different now. Tighter. Like he'd seen something he couldn't unsee. Then Seokjin. Then Junhyuk. He walked in like nothing had changed. Like he hadn't just turned the mansion into a hunting ground. But Amara saw it immediately. On the edge of his white cuff, near his wrist. A thin streak of red. Fresh. Not splattered. Not messy. Controlled. As if even blood understood the rules around him. Her stomach dropped so hard she thought she might be sick. Junhyuk didn't sit. He didn't speak. He took one step closer, then another, until he was standing directly in front of her. Amara's lips parted, but no sound came out. He lowered himself slowly. Not kneeling like a man begging. Kneeling like a man inspecting a wound. Like a judge coming down to eye level with the accused. His gaze didn't go to her sleeve this time. It went to her face. Her eyes. Her fear. Then he asked the question that didn't belong in the same world as everything else. What did you steal? Amara froze. The word hit her like a slap because she didn't understand it. Steal. Her throat tightened. I didn't steal anything. Junhyuk's voice stayed quiet, almost gentle. Amara. Hearing her name like that. From him. Made her skin go cold. He tilted his head slightly, watching her the way predators watched wounded prey. Not hungry but curious. Someone touched you, he said softly. Someone who knows exactly what happens when they touch what's in my house. His eyes narrowed. So tell me the truth. He leaned closer, close enough that she could see the faint scar near his eyebrow, the kind a man earns in a world that doesn't forgive mistakes. What did you steal? He repeated slower. That made them brave enough to bleed you in my office. Amara's mouth opened, but the truth wouldn't come out like normal words. It sat behind her teeth like glass. Junhyuk stayed kneeling in front of her, calm enough to feel unnatural. He didn't rush her. He didn't soften his voice either. He simply waited like he had all the time in the world and she had none. Behind him, Juno and Seokjin stood guard. Silent pillars in the room. Not watching her like men watching a fragile woman. Watching her like men watching a fuse. Amara's hands trembled in her lap. She forced them still, pressing her palms together so hard her nails bit into her skin. Pain helped her breathe. Pain was simple. This wasn't. I didn't steal, she said again, but the sentence came out smaller this time, weaker. Like she was trying to convince herself. Junhyuk's eyes didn't change. That wasn't my question, he replied. Amara swallowed. Her throat felt raw, like she'd been crying for hours when she hadn't. Like her body had been mourning before her mind caught up. Her voice broke. She hated that. She hated that the sound of weakness could be heard by powerful men. She lowered her gaze to her sleeve, to the dried blood near her elbow. The stain looked ugly against the uniform she washed every night until it was clean enough to pretend her life was clean too. Then she whispered, almost as if saying it louder would summon death. I didn't cry because I was hurt. Junhyuk's face tightened by a fraction, so small most people would miss it. But she saw it. Because fear makes you an expert at reading tiny changes in dangerous faces. I cried. Amara continued, her chest rising in sharp, careful breaths. Because I'm trapped. The room didn't move. Even the air felt like it had stopped. Junhyuk didn't ask how or why. He asked the only thing that mattered. Who trapped you? Amara's lips trembled. She shut them again, shaking her head fast like that could shake the memory loose. If I say it, you'll kill them. I'll do what they earned, he corrected quietly. That was worse. Because it meant he wasn't denying it. It meant he was promising it. Amara stared at the floor, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely there. It's not just one person. Juno's jaw flexed. Seekjin's eyes narrowed. The first sign of emotion he'd shown since they brought her inside. Junhyuk stayed still, but Amara felt the shift in him anyway, like an entire city had just turned its head in the same direction. Inside my organization, he asked. She hesitated. That hesitation was a confession. Yes, she breathed. Junhyuk rose slowly from his kneel, unfolding to his full height like something waking up. When he stood, the room felt smaller. The ceiling felt lower. The air felt thinner. Amara's eyes burned. She wanted to explain everything at once. But trauma never tells stories in straight lines. It started small, she said. Little things. Orders I didn't understand. Places I was told to clean that I was never supposed to enter. Files I was told to carry without looking at them. She laughed once. Broken, bitter. And I didn't look. Because I'm a maid. Maids survive by not looking. Junhyuk's expression didn't soften. But something darker settled in his gaze, like a shadow taking shape. They used you, he said. Amara nodded, tears threatening again. They thought I was perfect. Junhyuk's eyes narrowed. Perfect for what? She forced the words out like they were poison. For hiding things. A quiet pulse of anger moved through the room. Not loud. Not dramatic. The kind that killed people in silence. Amara lifted her trembling hands, then lowered them again, like she didn't deserve to ask for mercy. They targeted me in your office, she whispered. Because they thought I was taking something back. Junhyuk stepped closer. Were you? Amara's breath caught. Then she nodded. Yes. Juno shifted forward. Boss. Junhyuk lifted one hand slightly. Juno stopped immediately. Amara's eyes locked onto Junhyuk's, and for the first time she didn't look away. Because I saw it, she said. I saw what they're doing under your name. And I realized something. Her voice shook, but the meaning landed like a blade. If I die, you'll never know who betrayed you. Junhyuk stared at her for a long moment. Then his voice dropped, barely a whisper. What do you have? Amara's lips parted. This was the point of no return. I have evidence, she said. But not here. Junhyuk's eyes sharpened. Where? She swallowed, heart hammering. It's hidden, she admitted. Somewhere only you can access. Somewhere no one else would dare touch because it belongs to you. Junhyuk went completely still. So still it frightened her. And then in a voice so calm it felt like the beginning of a storm, he murmured, If this is true. His gaze darkened, not at her, but past her, through walls, through bloodlines. My own family did it. Junhyuk didn't move for a full 3 seconds, but the air in the room changed anyway. Amara watched it happen the way you watch a glass crack from the inside. No sound at first. Then a slow, invisible split that you know will shatter everything if you breathe wrong. Juno stepped closer, cautious now. Boss, who is it? Junhyuk's gaze stayed on Amara, but his voice went somewhere else. Somewhere cold and old. Bring my coat. Seekjin hesitated. Right now. Junhyuk blinked once. Now. Amara's throat tightened. You're going to kill someone. I'm going to listen, he corrected, but the calm in his tone wasn't comfort. It was punishment served without emotion. They moved her through the mansion like she was a secret they didn't want the walls to learn. No shouting. No running. No panic. Just doors opening at the right time. Footsteps swallowing the marble hallway. Men standing straight as statues in corners where shadows gathered. Amara had been inside luxury before, but this wasn't luxury. This was control disguised as comfort. Even the silence felt trained. When they reached his private office again, Amara's heart dipped. That was where everything had started. That was where she'd bled on his floor, trying not to make a sound, trying not to become an object of attention. Junhyuk entered first. The same desk. The same scent of expensive wood and restrained violence. The same lamp casting a warm glow that didn't belong to anything warm. He walked behind the desk, opened a hidden panel she hadn't even known existed, and pulled out a black folder sealed with a thin metal clasp. It looked untouched, too clean to be real. Amara's breath hitched. That's it. Juno's eyes widened. You hid it in the boss's office. Amara didn't answer. She didn't have to. There was only one reason she would hide a knife in the one place no one dared search. Junhyuk unclasped the folder and flipped it open. The first page wasn't a list. It wasn't money. It was a photo. A man in a hospital hallway. His face turned half away from the camera. His hand was gripping Amara's wrist so tightly her skin looked white. The second photo showed the same man slipping an envelope into a suit pocket, one of Junhyuk's men. Amara felt her knees threaten to fold. That hallway. That night. The smell of antiseptic and fear. Junhyuk turned the page. There were names. Transfers. Something darker than theft. Juno leaned in, and his voice turned rough. These are internal routes. These are our private cars, our safe exits. Amara's lips parted, but the words wouldn't come out. Her body remembered too much. Junhyuk kept turning pages, slow. Methodical. Like every sheet of paper was another nail into a coffin he hadn't realized he built himself. Then he stopped. Amara's eyes followed his gaze to a signature at the bottom of one report. Elegant handwriting. Sharp strokes. A woman's name. Madame Hun. His mother. Amara's blood went cold. For a second Junhyuk didn't breathe. His eyes didn't flare. His hands didn't shake. But the muscles in his jaw tightened so hard it looked painful. Juno whispered like he didn't want the walls to hear. Boss, that can't be. Junhyuk closed the folder with a soft click. That's why she was attacked in my office, he said quietly. Amara swallowed. She knew I found it. She knew I was going to show you. Junhyuk lifted his phone and made one call. No greeting. No explanation. Bring everyone to the main hall, he said. Now. Amara's stomach twisted. Everyone. Yes. Minutes later, the mansion felt awake in the most terrifying way. Not loud, just alert. Men moved fast but controlled. Doors opened. Footsteps multiplied. The entire house seemed to lean toward one point like a blade being drawn. In the main hall, his inner circle gathered. Older men with polite smiles. Younger men with eyes too loyal to blink. The kind of people who drank tea while ordering deaths. And then she entered. Madame Hun. His mother. She walked like she owned more than the house. Like she owned the silence itself. Her hair was perfectly pinned, her face calm, her expression soft, almost maternal. Almost. Her eyes landed on Amara. And something passed between them in an instant. A thin thread of recognition. Fear didn't live in Madame Hun's eyes. But amusement did. Junhyuk stood at the front like the storm had finally stepped outside. Someone here tried to remove what is mine. His mother's smile barely moved. What is yours, my son? Junhyuk's gaze didn't flinch. Truth. He tossed the folder onto the polished floor. The sound was small. But every man in that hall reacted like a gunshot had gone off. Juno opened it, flipped the pages fast. His face draining as he read. The whispers didn't start right away. They died first. Then they started. Because betrayal wasn't just in the folder. It was in the room. Junhyuk looked at one man near the left column. An uncle figure, older, heavy rings, smooth eyes. You ordered the hospital routes. The man didn't deny it. He simply raised his chin. I did what this family needed. Junhyuk's voice stayed calm. And you, he said, turning to another, paid the nurse supervisor. That man's lips trembled. Madame Han watched serene. Amara couldn't breathe. Junhyuk stepped forward and stopped in front of his mother. Why is your name on the file? Madame Han tilted her head like a gentle teacher. Because I am the one who built the walls you live behind. Amara's chest tightened. You tried to kill me. Madame Han finally looked at her fully, like she was seeing her properly for the first time. No, she said softly. I tried to erase a problem. Junhyuk's eyes darkened. She's not a problem. Madame Han's smile widened just a little. And then, with a quiet confidence that felt like a knife sliding into skin, the traitor, his uncle, stepped forward, amused by the tension, amused by the trembling maid in the corner. He glanced at Amara, then back at Junhyuk, and he smiled. You can punish us, he said, voice smooth like poisoned honey. You can burn this house down. His gaze sharpened. But you can't save her without losing everything. The smile on the traitor's face didn't come from bravery. Came from certainty. Because while everyone's eyes were on Junhyuk, someone else was already moving. Amara felt it before she saw it. That shift in air. That quiet pressure behind the ribs. Like the house itself had stopped protecting her. Madame Han's gaze slid away from her. Just for a second. Like a queen losing interest in a pawn that had already been marked. Junhyuk held his ground in the hall. Voice steady, terrifyingly low. You're telling me to choose. His uncle's eyes gleamed. No. I'm telling you the choice was made the moment you cared. That word, cared, hit Amara harder than any slap ever could. She wasn't supposed to matter. She wasn't supposed to be important enough to start a war inside a family that kills for breakfast. And yet she felt it now. Like a target painted onto her skin. Her hands curled into fists at her sides, nails pressing into her palms. She reminded herself she was still standing, still breathing, still alive. Then Juno's phone buzzed. His face changed so fast the blood drained before his mouth could form words. Boss, he said, voice cracking. Security just. The lights flickered. Not fully out. Not dramatic. Just a single flicker like a blink. And in that blink, the mansion reminded Amara of what it truly was. A fortress doesn't make you safe. It just makes it harder for anyone to hear you scream. A guard near the door suddenly stiffened, eyes wide. Hand going to his throat like he'd been stung. His lips moved, but no sound came out. He collapsed without noise. The hall didn't erupt. Not yet. Because Junhyuk didn't move. He didn't shout. He didn't reach for a gun in panic. He only turned his head slightly, eyes slicing through the room like a blade searching for the first lie. Madame Han's expression stayed calm. Come. Amara took a step back without thinking. And that was when she felt a hand grab her from behind. Fast, strong, gloved. Her mouth opened, no sound. A second hand clamped over her face, pressing hard enough to bruise. The grip wasn't wild. It was trained, quiet, efficient. They weren't here to scare her. They were here to remove her. Amara's body reacted before her mind could even scream. She drove her elbow backward with everything she had. Bone met ribs. A grunt. The hand slipped from her mouth just enough for air to rip in. She bit down on the thumb like an animal, tasted blood, heard the sharp inhale of surprise. She twisted, hard, forcing her shoulder under the attacker's arm, dropping her weight the way her mother once taught her back when they lived in a place where doors didn't lock properly. Her heel stamped down. Something cracked. The attacker stumbled, but another one grabbed her hair and yanked her head back. Pain exploded along her scalp, white-hot. She reached blindly, clawing at the grip, and felt fabric. Black, tactical, expensive. Not street thugs. Not desperate thieves. This was an extraction team. Inside his own mansion. Her heart thundered as she realized something colder than fear. Someone gave them the codes. Someone opened the path. Someone inside this house wanted her gone more than they feared Junhyuk. They dragged her toward the hallway, moving her like luggage. She kicked, fought, scratched. Her nails caught skin. Someone hissed. A fist drove into her stomach. Controlled, not emotional, knocking the breath out of her without making noise. Her knees buckled. She tasted bile. And in that moment, she understood something that shattered her. She could be brave. She could fight. But she was still human. Still breakable. Still alone. She saw the corridor lights blur. The marble floor tilted. She heard the soft click of a door opening somewhere deeper in the mansion. An exit route prepared. Then the grip on her suddenly loosened. Not because they chose to. Because the air changed again. A new presence. Heavy. Absolute. The attackers froze mid-step like animals sensing a predator they couldn't see. Amara's knees hit the floor. Her hands shook as she tried to push herself up. Then she heard his footsteps. Low. And hurried. Deadly calm. Junhyuk appeared at the end of the corridor, suit jacket gone. Sleeves rolled up like he'd taken off the last piece of mercy. His eyes landed on her first. Blood smeared on her lips. A cut at her brow. Her breathing broken and sharp. And for one moment, the most feared man in the city looked like he'd been stabbed without a blade. Too late. Again. He didn't look at the attackers right away. He stared at the blood on her face like it was a personal insult. Then his gaze lifted. Two men in black masks. One with a bleeding hand. One still holding a stun baton he hadn't even used yet. Junhyuk spoke softly. Who sent you? No answer. One of them moved, just barely, like he was going to run. Junhyuk didn't chase. He simply said, voice low enough to be gentle, and cold enough to end lives. Burn the whole chain. The mansion didn't feel like a home anymore. Felt like a courtroom with no judge. The corridor was still. Too still. The kind of silence that only comes after a threat has been handled. But the danger hasn't ended. Amara sat on the cold marble floor with her back against the wall, breathing like she had just run through fire. Her hands were shaking, but not from weakness. From adrenaline. From the shock of realizing she had almost disappeared inside a house that was supposed to be untouchable. Junhyuk crouched in front of her without asking permission, not close enough to trap her, but close enough that she could see the faint tremor in his jaw. The blood on her lip made his eyes sharpen. He reached out, hesitated, then slowly pulled his hand back like he'd remembered she wasn't his to touch. That restraint was the first thing that scared her. Not his power. Not his men. His control. Juno stood behind him, reporting in a whisper. We traced the route. Someone opened gate 3. Someone disabled the hallway camera at exactly 11:47. It wasn't random. Junhyuk didn't blink. Names. Juno swallowed. We're getting them. Amara let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, except there was no humor in it. You're going to make them disappear, she said quietly. That's what you do. Junhyuk's gaze lifted to her face. That's what I did to keep this city from burning. No, she corrected, voice calm but edged with something sharp. That's what you did to keep your throne clean. The words didn't hit him like an insult. They hit him like truth. The kind that sinks into bone. He stayed kneeling. You shouldn't be here, he said. Not in this. Amara wiped the blood from her mouth with the back of her hand. I didn't ask to be. She looked past him toward the dark hallway, as if she could still see the hands that dragged her. But now I am. Junhyuk turned his head slightly. They won't touch you again. You said that before, she whispered. And for the first time since he had found her crying in his office, the air between them changed. Amara wasn't trembling anymore. She wasn't begging. She wasn't even afraid in the way people usually are around him. She was angry. Not loud. Not dramatic. The kind of anger that gets a person killed because it refuses to bow. Why are you doing this? She asked him, eyes steady. Why protect me? Junhyuk's jaw tightened. Because they hurt you. That's not an answer. His eyes flickered just once. Like the real answer was something he didn't want to speak. Amara leaned forward slightly, pain in her ribs pulling her breath thin. You think you can protect me by burying this, she said. By erasing names. By silencing the truth. His voice lowered. It's the only way to keep you alive. Amara's stare didn't soften. Alive, or controlled. That word landed between them like a blade on a table. Control. Ownership. The thing everyone assumed he would do to her the moment she became his weakness. Junhyuk looked away. Just for a second. That tiny movement was the first crack in the monster everyone feared. Amara watched it and felt something dangerous rise in her chest. Not affection. Not romance. Something heavier. Power. Because she finally understood something about him. He wasn't protecting her because he wanted her. He was protecting her because the truth she carried was now looking him in the face. "I'm not going to be hidden," she said. "I'm not going to disappear into your safe rooms and pretend this didn't happen." Junhyuk's eyes sharpened. "You don't understand what you're asking." "Yes," she whispered. "I do." She pushed herself up slowly, wincing. She stood in front of him, unsteady but upright, like a person deciding to stop surviving quietly. "Your men did this," she said. "Someone inside your circle did this. Inside your family." Junhyuk rose to his full height. The hallway suddenly felt smaller. "If I expose it," he said softly, "everything falls." Amara's voice didn't shake. "Then let it fall." He stared at her like she was insane. Like she didn't understand the cost. But she did. That was the terrifying part. "Justice isn't clean," she continued. "It doesn't protect crowns. It doesn't care about your name. It cares about what was done." Junhyuk stepped closer, stopping just short of her space. "If I do this," he said, eyes dark, "my mother will never forgive me." Amara lifted her chin. "And if you don't," she answered quietly, "I will never forgive you." The air held. False choice. A trap disguised as mercy. He could silence the truth and keep his empire intact. Or expose the truth and destroy the very world that built him. Junhyuk's gaze dropped to the bruises forming on her arm. Then back to her eyes. He breathed out, slow, like a man letting go of something that once kept him alive. "Bring the file," he said to Juno. Juno froze. "Boss." "Now." Juno nodded and moved. Amara didn't smile. She didn't thank him. She just stood there, blood on her lip, eyes unbowed, as if she had just watched a king choose to step off his throne. And then Madame Han's voice came from behind them, calm as snowfall. "So," she said, "you choose her." Junhyuk didn't turn at first. "I choose the truth." The silence that followed was colder than winter. Madame Han stepped into the corridor, her face unreadable, her eyes sharp enough to cut steel. "Then you are no longer my son." He didn't argue with her, he didn't beg, he didn't raise his voice. Junhyuk just stood there in the hallway, the weight of his mother's words pressing into the silence like a gun cocking in the dark. Then he did something none of them expected. He bowed his head once, not to her, not to his men, but to the truth. "Get everyone to the main room," he said. Juno blinked. "Boss, now." "Now." The mansion woke up without a sound, doors opened. Footsteps moved like shadows across marble. Men in black suits lined the corridor in disciplined rows, not asking questions, because the tone in his voice wasn't anger. It was final. Amara watched from the side, her arms wrapped around herself, her body still aching where they had grabbed her. Someone tried to hand her a blanket and she almost refused out of instinct, because kindness in this world always came with a price. But Junhyuk didn't look at her like she owed him. He looked at her like he was the one who owed something. In the main room, Madame Han sat like she owned the air, calm, untouched. Her gaze never once flickered toward Amara's bruises. Like pain was nothing more than an inconvenience. The traitor stood near the fireplace with that same smug expression, as if this was still a game he could win. Junhyuk walked to the center of the room and stopped. His men waited. His empire waited. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath. "You've been stealing from me," Junhyuk said softly. No accusation, no drama. Just a statement. The traitor laughed under his breath. "Is this about the maid?" Amara's throat tightened at the word. Maid, like she was furniture that cried. Junhyuk's eyes lifted, slow and cold. "You attacked someone under my roof," he said. "You used my security, my codes, my people." The traitor shrugged. She saw too much. Madame Han didn't move. She didn't even pretend to be surprised, so that was the truth. It wasn't just betrayal, it was permission. Amara's breath came shallow. She looked at Junhyuk, waiting for the violence everyone always promised would follow. But he didn't reach for a weapon, he reached for something worse, a phone. He made one call, then placed it on speaker. "Release the documents," he said to the voice on the other end. "All of them." Juno's head snapped up. "Boss." Junhyuk silenced him with a glance. Amara didn't understand at first, until screens around the room started lighting up. Tablets, phones, security monitors, one by one like a chain reaction, bank transfers, bribes, hidden names, routes, corruption. Everything that made them untouchable. Everything that made him powerful, and then the final file, a list. Not of enemies, of allies. People Junhyuk had trusted for years, people who smiled in his face while building a knife behind his back. Madame Han's expression finally shifted, not fear, disgust. "You're destroying your own blood," she said quietly. Junhyuk answered without looking away. "They destroyed mine first." The traitor lunged forward, furious now. "You can't do this." Junhyuk's voice stayed calm. "Watch me." He took the folder Juno had brought earlier, the evidence Amara hid where only he could reach, and placed it on the table in front of everyone. Then he lit it. The flames rose fast, devouring paper like hunger. Madame Han stood sharply. "That's proof." Junhyuk nodded once. "Exactly." He wasn't just exposing them, he was cutting off every option to go back to. No bargaining chips, no half measures, no survival through compromise. His phone buzzed again and again. Calls from executives, captains, politicians, men who owed him their lives. He ignored every single one. Instead, he turned toward her, his voice dropped, quieter than the fire. "I can't give you peace," he said. "But I can give you a way out." Amara stared at him. He looked tired, not tired like a man who worked too hard, tired like a man who had carried darkness for so long he forgot what light felt like. "And you," she whispered. Junhyuk's mouth tightened. "I don't get a way out," he admitted. "I get a price." Madame Han's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Walk away, and you will have nothing." Junhyuk looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time there was no sun in his eyes. Only a man choosing to stop being made. "I already do," he said. Outside, sirens began to rise in the distance, not for Amara, for him. For everything his name used to control. Junhyuk walked past the men who once bowed to him, past the mother who once ruled him, past the throne that had been built from fear. He didn't look back. Amara followed slowly, stepping into the cold night air with bruises under her skin and a burn in her chest that would never fully heal. He found her crying in his office, and thought saving her would be simple. But the truth wasn't a fight, it was a price, and he paid it with everything.